Okay, so today we're diving into something really personal, and you've given us a lot to think about from your experiences and reflections on aging as an individual on the autism spectrum. We talk a lot about aging in general, but what really struck me about your notes was this idea that we need to tailor the conversation when we're thinking about the autism community.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most important things to understand is that aging on the spectrum doesn't mean that you become more autistic.
Yeah.
It's not like suddenly like, oh gosh, now I'm even more autistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about how the sensory sensitivities and social preferences that are often associated with autism might interact a little bit differently with the changes that come with aging.
That's such a good point. It's not about this like fundamental shift in who you are, but how you experience the world might evolve a little bit. And you actually mentioned that you've become even more sensitive to loud noises as you've gotten older.
Yes, and that's actually something that I've heard echoed by many individuals on the spectrum, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because aging in and of itself can lead to increased sensitivity in general.
Mm-hmm.
And then you layer that on top of sensitivities that might already be present.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly those loud restaurants or those crowded social gatherings, those might feel even more overwhelming.
It makes you stop and think, right? Like even those everyday experiences that might have always been a little bit tricky could become more challenging with age. And again, it's not about becoming more autistic. It's about how those core aspects of yourself might interact with the aging process. And something else you talked about that I thought was really insightful was this idea of increased isolation as people age, especially if they're on the spectrum.
Yes, and this is where understanding the social landscape of aging is so important. Because for many people, our social circles naturally shrink as we get older.
Right.
Careers change, families move. We might not have the same opportunities for social interaction that we once did. And for individuals on the spectrum who might already navigate social situations a little differently, those changes can be particularly challenging.
That's a really good point. So it's not just about the physical changes of aging, but the social and emotional shifts that can come with getting older and how those might be experienced differently by individuals on the spectrum.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of being proactive, both for individuals on the spectrum and their support networks.
Something else that really stood out to me in your notes was when you were talking about experiencing kind of like heightened anxiety as you've gotten older.
Yes, and that's something that I think is often overlooked when we talk about aging and autism.
Yeah, it's interesting because we often focus on the physical aspects of aging, right? But the emotional well-being of aging individuals, and particularly those on the spectrum, is so important.
Absolutely. And I think one of the challenges there is really trying to disentangle what might be considered typical age-related changes in mood versus what might be specifically related to autism or even just other individual factors. Like, for example, many people experience some decline in cognitive function as they age.
Right.
And while that's completely normal, it could be misconstrued as social withdrawal or disinterest in someone on the spectrum.
That's such a good point to remember because it's so easy to jump to those conclusions without really looking at the full picture. And you mentioned how changes in routine can be really challenging for you, like those that often accompany retirement, for example.
Yeah, because routine and structure can be so grounding for individuals on the spectrum. So when those routines are disrupted, it can definitely lead to increased anxiety or stress. And it's not just retirement, right? It could be any kind of change that shakes up that usual day-to-day. A change in living situation, a health issue, even just the natural shifts that occur as we get older.
It makes perfect sense when you think about it, right? Our routines give us that sense of predictability, that sense of control. And when those are disrupted, it's only natural that anxiety might increase. So what are some of the strategies that you found helpful for managing those emotional ups and downs? Because you shared some really practical coping mechanisms in your notes.
Yeah, one that I've personally found to be really helpful is mindfulness and meditation. Just taking that time to really be present in the moment and manage feelings of overwhelm. But again, it's about finding what works best for you.
Right. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. There are so many different approaches to emotional well-being, whether it's mindfulness, creative expression, spending time in nature, connecting with loved ones. It's about finding those things that help you feel grounded and supported and making sure to incorporate them into your daily life.
And that makes me think about what you said about exercise and staying active. You were really adamant about not just the physical benefits, but how it helped you feel more emotionally resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. Because physical activity releases endorphins, right? Which have mood-boosting effects. And it doesn't have to be anything strenuous. Even a short walk in the park or some gentle stretching can make a world of difference.
You also mentioned sensory activities as a really good way to manage anxiety and sensory overload. Can you talk a little bit more about what those look like for you?
Sure. For me, it's a lot about being mindful of my sensory environment and incorporating activities that help me feel grounded and calm. So, for example, I love spending time in nature. The sights and the sounds and even the smells of the outdoors have a really calming effect on me. But I also find that things like weighted blankets and noise-canceling headphones can be really helpful for managing sensory overload when I'm at home.
So it's kind of about having a toolkit, right? Of strategies and things you can turn to when you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed.
Precisely. Yeah. And that toolkit might look different for everyone. The important thing is to be proactive about finding what works for you and seeking out support when you need it.
And speaking of support, you actually called out the Autism Society as a resource that you found particularly helpful. Can you tell me a little bit more about what resonated with you about their approach? The Autism Society, it's interesting that you bring them up because their whole approach really speaks to this idea of adaptability as a superpower, which you've kind of woven throughout your notes.
Yeah, absolutely. And their focus on providing lifelong support and resources really resonated with me because they recognize that autism is not something you just grow out of. The needs of individuals on this spectrum continue to evolve throughout the lifespan.
Yeah, it's not just about, okay, here's some support and then you're on your own. It's about empowering people to advocate for themselves, to navigate a world that isn't always designed with their needs in mind.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. That's why I think this whole idea of adaptability as a superpower is so important.
Yeah.
It's not about denying the challenges, but it's about recognizing the incredible resilience and resourcefulness that individuals on the spectrum often develop as they kind of navigate a world that can be, overwhelming or confusing at times.
And it's not just about coping, it's about thriving. And you talked about that in your notes too, about really focusing on your strengths, which I love because it's so easy to get caught up in the challenges, right? But remembering what you're good at, what brings you joy, that's so essential.
Absolutely. It's about having that balanced perspective.
Right.
Recognizing both the challenges and the strengths. And I think that's something that comes with age for everyone, but it can be especially important for individuals on the spectrum who have maybe faced a lifetime of being told what they can't do.
Yes. Shifting that narrative from limitations to possibilities. And, as you've been talking, I was thinking about technology and how it plays into all of this, because you didn't mention it specifically in your notes, but it feels like it could be such a powerful tool for fostering that adaptability as we age.
Oh, absolutely. And not just in terms of assistive technologies, although those are incredibly important, but think about how things like smart home devices could be used to create more structured environments or provide sensory feedback, or even just how online communities can combat social isolation and help people foster those connections.
Right. It's like technology can almost be this bridge between the challenges that can come with aging and the unique needs of individuals on the spectrum. It's all about using these tools in a way that supports well-being and empowers people to really live their best lives.
Well said. And, as we kind of wrap up here, I think the most important takeaway is that this is a journey. It's not a destination. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to aging on the spectrum. It's about self-discovery. It's about finding what works best for you and building a support system that celebrates your strengths and helps you navigate the challenges.
That's beautifully put. And for everyone listening, thank you for sharing your journey with us. We hope this has given you some things to think about, maybe even a little inspiration as you navigate your own